Good evening, everybody. Great to see all of you here in this conversation that matters. My name is Loes Damhof. I am currently situated in the northern part of the Netherlands. I work at the University of Applied Sciences there, and where I'm holding a UNESCO chair on futures literacy. I started on this journey 5 years ago, and right now my expertise is training, teaching, facilitating workshops and programs, doing research on the impacts and design principles for my university, but also for UNESCO and many global organizations. So that's it. Alex, want to go next?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm on the Isle of Wight, blue sky. And I am an artist and writer and sometimes activist, although probably more than not. And I've been working with Loes for a little over a year and a half with FL, which I came across in my own work, seeking to connect people with what can be heard beyond the echo of our own clamour. And I found FL to be an absolutely brilliant tool in not just aiding that connection between head and heart, but in enabling you to weave what you discover into your practice of life, however you apply that. Steve.
Hi everyone, I'm Steve Fuller. I am head of the house, and the house is a B Corp and a purpose consultancy, and we spend our working days and some of our working nights helping organisations to be a force for good in the world. And my interest in this subject will become clear later, but I help people create purpose-driven visions of the future.
Nice, thank you very much. I believe this is my cue. This is a nice, small, intimate group, which is great. That gives us an opportunity to actually have a conversation with all of you. So what we wanted to do is to give you a little bit of an experience. Let's call it tasting. And because future literacy is a capability, and it's often acquired by a tool, a methodology, which is a very carefully designed knowledge creation process. And it's really about the use of the collective wisdom. And it's best, I guess, being introduced to just experience it. So what we will do is, first I will give you a little bit of some context of how we can use futures and a little bit of futures thinking. And then we are going to take you on a little journey, an immersive cultural experience to give you an actual taste of what it is that we are talking about. And after that, we will open up the space to start a conversation. You can ask us several things. Why Steve is so interested in this subject, what the connection is between Alex's arts and work and FL, and the work that we've been doing and that we are planning to do. So yeah, that's the program for today. Did I miss anything, gentlemen? No? Okay. Then, so bear with me. I'm going to talk for a few minutes. I'm going to very traditionally show a few slides, but just to give you a little bit of context of what it is that we are actually talking about. And feel free to put questions in the chat. Steve and Alex will try to answer them as well as they can. Just putting them on the spot here. And if you please also feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Again, this is an open space, a conversation. So please feel free. Okay. So sharing my screen for a minute and going down all the way to the top. Yes, and I always like to start with a quote from my good friend, brother, Bayo Akomolafe. We don't share any biological genes, but we have conceptual parents, I'm told by him, who's a thought leader and activist, poet, writer, philosopher. And he is kind of quoting here a Nigerian proverb, which is called, "These times are urgent, let us slow down." And this picture is yeah, I think, yes, I don't know if you can see it, is where the ocean touches the sky, and maybe it's kind of the liminal space that we may find ourselves in at the moment, and that it's not actually not a bad place to be, because in these urgent times, these times feel sometimes urgent and very uncertain. We are perceive them as uncertain, but the thing is, times have always been whether urgent or uncertain. But now it feels more like it, because some of our assumptions about continuity and discontinuity are being challenged in the situation that we're in at the moment. And sometimes if we find ourselves in a time that is challenging and urgent, the first response can be, how do we get out of this? So how do we act? How do we make a decision? How do we innovate? How do we, etc. But sometimes it's actually better to slow down for a minute and to rethink our steps and our planning and what we, in trying to plan for the next step, maybe think about what are we overlooking if we are planning for the future. So I'm inviting you to slow down with us in this tasting session, and just be with us in that liminal space just for a little bit. So futures literacy, again, this is a very brief introduction. There will be more in longer sessions in the month of June, but as a general definition, it's a capability, a skill, a competency. It's about imagining multiple futures, diverse futures, and looking through those futures at the present and new. So it's about using futures to see things differently in the present. So it's not much about the future, actually. It's very much about the present. We often think of the relationship between the present and the future is that what we do in the present has an impact on the future. But we're saying it's actually the other way around. It's how we look at the future that has an impact on today. And we will show you why that is and how that is. So it's a capability that's important because there's a distinction between, it means it's important, that means that it can be taught and it can be learned, but it also requires some practice. And it's best practiced through what we call a future literacy lab, a laboratory, a workshop. So that you will give a very short tasting of today. A little bit about futures. Often when we look around us, we see the word future everywhere, especially now. And it's always, it's spoken about like there's only one future. Design your future, make your future. Are you ready for the future? The future is uncertain. This is all true, but there's also a misconception, is that there is not one future. Because the question arises when you see this, whose future? Yours, mine, them, theirs. So there are multiple futures. My future is very different from yours. And at the same time, we cannot actually design or make the future. First of all, there is not one. But the second of all, you cannot make something that is not there or will never be there. The definition of the future is it's later than now. And it only exists in our imagination. So every time we talk about something in the future, we talk about imagination. We talk about something that we anticipate, that we imagine. And for something that does not exist, it has a profound impact on how we think and behave and act in the present. So it's probably a good idea to get to know a little bit more about how and why we anticipate. So like I said, the future is unknown. These times, it feels now that times are more uncertain, but they've always been uncertain. Times have always been complex, and not more uncertain complex than they used to, but it feels more because we are shaken. Some things that we took for granted are now being challenged and questioned. That's why these times feel a little bit different. And sometimes we look at this as if we're trying to plan or come up with a scenario, we're trying to create this sense of safety, that if we're just following this path, or this guy knows where he's going, and if we're not really questioning our own decision making in that process or why we base that on, then we actually are creating a false sense of safety, and we're just really balancing on the unknown without realizing and acknowledging that we really don't know a lot of things. So planning or just focusing too much on one certain path for the future we can run the risk of overlooking what is really important in the present. So just to give you, to get a little bit into that. So how we anticipate matters, it changes the present, and the discipline of anticipation is very much about how we use futures. And I just want to describe really quickly, what do I mean when I say we use the future? We use it because we imagine, and that has an impact on how we behave. And how we behave, we see maybe we start to make some decisions, and we go through life, and then we see other the other images of the future, and that old future is used up. We use it. It's like falling in love. When you meet somebody and you fall in love, all of a sudden you see a new future, and that old future that you were thinking, that's a used one. So we're constantly using these futures. So how do we do that? Two important ways of using futures is through planning and preparation. That is something that we usually do. We either plan for an optimal result, or something that we want to happen, or we prepare for something that we think is going to happen. This is how we get through our day. That's extremely useful and efficient, right? Because we're planning whether it's for our wedding day or our career, or we're preparing ourselves for the effects of climate change, or preparing for a third wave, a fourth wave of corona, or a new virus mutation. These are all usages of the future that are extremely useful, and that is what we know. But what we also know now, and especially now, is that you cannot plan or prepare everything. There is a certain unexpected element about the future. The universe is emerging. There's a lot of spontaneity, improvisation, things are uncertain, things pop up that we didn't really think about. And often our first response is either eliminate the uncertainty or trying to solve the complexity. But we're saying that since you cannot eliminate all of it or solve all of it, why not change how we relate to the unexpected, how we relate to uncertainty, and actually maybe start to even appreciate it. And this is the third way of using the future, that is exploration. How? By exploring multiple futures, like really stretching the imagination, coming up with new scenarios, using arts or different ways to imagine. We can look at the present and see the novelty that is around us, the new things that we didn't see before because we were so busy planning and preparing. So future literacy is about navigating through these ways of using the future. And if you can identify, when am I planning, when am I preparing, and when am I exploring to see the novelty in the present, then you are futures literate. Now, can you do that in 1 hour? No. That's why we're just giving a tasting and a little bit of sense of what is it. But this is a very brief introduction. So we're going to, now I'm going to stop sharing for a minute, because now I've explained this, planning and preparation, we're going to get a little bit deeper in how we use futures for exploration. We're going to give you a very tiny little exercise as what we call a future literacy lab. And what we need to do is to answer a couple of questions in the chat. And I'd like to give the word to Steve to guide us through that process. Okay.
Thank you, Liz. So the question we'd like to set you, the future we'd like you to consider is, what is the future of belonging? So it's 2071. So we're 50 years into the future. What is the future of belonging? So what I'd like you to do is just close your eyes, take a couple of deep breaths, and just relax into that question. And the way I'd like you to answer it is to describe the probable future of belonging. So for you, what is the probable future of belonging? The future that's at the front of your mind. What do you think that future would be? What do you anticipate? What do you predict? So as these thoughts arise, your predictions, your anticipations. Be really, I would love to see if you could put them into the chat. So as these thoughts arise, as they come to you, please just put them into the chat as and when they arrive. So some really interesting language coming through already, being heard, being a part of a community, sharing resource, no more imports from China, community again, being with nature, having all of our basic needs met locally, being alongside people, feeling that sense of global humanity. Growth is replaced by degrowth. Being in the moment, the truth of the moment, having a natural connection. There's that word connection again. That we'll probably have some new forms of currency. Somebody will be 98. That's an interesting age, part of an older generation. That we may not make it unless there is a new vaccine for whatever illness we may have at that time. Lovely. So yeah, please do keep filling in the chat. But yeah, I'd just like to ask you how that felt. Anyone be, share their answer, but also how it feels to be thinking about this idea of belonging in 2071. Anyone want to share their answer and just describe how that feels? I never thought the Hawkwood crowd would be shy, but I'm just going to read a couple of other answers. That there'll be hope, there'll be space for possibility, that we will have awoken to the reality that we are deeply interconnected. And Sylvia, just our question is that we are in 2071 and we're 50 years into the future. And we're answering the question about what is the future of belonging? What are our predictions? What do we anticipate? Chris, that's an interesting sense of around the unease and anxiety. Would you be happy to share that? Yeah.
Yeah, there is a hand. Yeah.
Oui.
Hello.
Cecile's just joined. Chris, yeah, that'd be lovely if you would just share your how it is to think that far into the future, and then how that led you to your answer.
Well, I took you as you put the question, which is I was not necessarily trying to consider myself directly, but put myself in that position. I wasn't thinking it isn't my hope, it's not my dream, and it's also not entirely my expectation. But I suppose I feel that the pace with which certain elements of our cultures and our societies are changing is ever increasing. People have complained about that for centuries, but in some areas it is increasing very rapidly. Other things are still continuing to just naturally be at the pace that they have been for, that we have evolved towards and that society has headed towards over millennia, let's say. And I think we're not necessarily, I mean, this is where with futures literacy, the ability to understand that some things are changing, some things aren't, and we don't necessarily always know which are doing which in which time. I think I see that sense of anxiety as something that about that concern that we don't quite know what's going on or why we feel the way we do is something that, I mean, I'm here because I'm interested in how we combat that. But I do feel that given the scale of the challenge, it's a fight we all have to fight, to sort of to see the invisible systems around us and become more literate in them. But we're a relatively small crowd here, and it's a great big world. So I think a lot of people will be feeling as I've written in 50 years' time, is my concern.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Very deep, very layered, full of complexity, full of uncertainty, doubt, anxiety. And
you're describing the 21st century, right? Because that's
the one with that's what it feels like. Thank you. EY.
B.
Yeah, I've just
Hi,
all
Steve,
I've got on your screen. Yeah, all I've got on your screen is EY. So
EY. Hi everyone. Thank you. Sorry, my name's Eve. So I don't know what I typed in, but anyway, great to be with you all.
Tonight, Eve, you're EY.
I know, just nom de plume, no problem. So I don't know whether I'm answering the right question at the moment, but I think the question I think I'm answering is how did that feel to do that little experiment, I guess, because I've never been part of a lab like this before. And I think I was very struck already by how your explanation as to what futures thinking does to your experience of the present has already started affecting my thought processes, because I think maybe I came to this evening with, very much like we have to try and see further, we have to try and get up the mountain to see from a higher vantage point, to see with more clarity and try and achieve a greater coherence somehow. But actually what I've realized is just imagining 20 whatever we are, 2071, I felt unexpectedly, I felt much lighter. And I just think this is a bit dangerous, because I'm thinking, what justification do I have for feeling like that? But I did, because I think all of the immediate problems which we don't know how we're going to solve had somehow, for better or worse, they've either led to some kind of apocalyptic series of events which somehow we've survived because we're answering the question in 2071, or we have collectively managed to somehow navigate through and we're still here. So either way, it gave me this incredible release from the immediate pressures, confusions, uncertainty, and feelings of inadequacy about what are we going to do. So I'm a head teacher by day, so living through COVID with the school, so I feel this is where my viewfinder has had to be for over a year now. So that I think it was very, very freeing actually to go so far beyond what is our sort of planning horizon of 5 years, 10 years, so far that you start to imagine, what if we got that far, what might we feel? And certainly what is our sort of relationship to each other and to the world, and who do we belong to and who belongs to us? Those themes are, quite interesting. Sorry, too much talking. That's just my short answer.
Not at all. I think that's a really powerful response. The freedom that it's given you, is remarkable. And I think that will come in really handy. I'm actually going to take up Chris's lead, because Chris said this isn't the future. that I hope for or that I dream of. So now I'm going to ask you to go back to 2071, but this time I'm going to ask you about the future of belonging and the future that you would dream of, hope for, desire. So what is the future you want? What's your heartfelt future? You know, what is your place of happiness and possibility? So again, just want you to breathe into that, close your eyes and just think about 2071 and what you desire. And as those feelings start to rise within you, as your sense of happiness rises, I just ask you to put what the future of belonging feels like. What's the future of belonging you desire? Just put that in the chat again as you did before. So I think Eve would like some balance. She'd like it 3 times, so I think that's a happy place for Eve. We have less anxiety for young people. We'd all support that one, Rachel. And we have a community that's driven by ritual. I'm not sure, Catherine, I can let you get away with writing that without getting some explanation. Where are you, Catherine, on my screen? Catherine, would you be happy just to share what you mean by a ritual-driven community?
Yeah, sure. At Hawkwood, actually, I was lucky enough to have a life-changing experience that showed me something I would never have believed if I'd read it in a book. And I have academic parents and a very book-filled life, so I treasure books, but this was an experiential plunge into a different understanding about how community craves and is maintained by ritual, and ritual enables and lubricates, facilitates and makes marvelous community in a way that is, I think, actually quite hard to sell to the rationalistic capitalist patriarchy, you know, led by consumerism and stuff. But in my experience, and I don't think my experience is unique or rare, the function of community is to make you love people, or enable, it's not making, it enables you to love people, because in ritual, you see them at their soul level. So the person you might think is a bit of a dick when you see him in the high street turns out to be the most awesome participant from the soul in ritual. So having completed a ritual, which might be a radical thing, you know, a rite of passage or something ad hoc, a funeral perhaps, or maybe a maintenance ritual, you know, the seasons of the year or whatever, the community rejoices, even with a tough thing like a funeral, the community rejoices in its communityness and is refreshed and is already panting for the next ritual. And there's nothing new about this. I mean, this is Indigenous life. It's just, in my personal opinion, we in the modern deracinated West have lost our way with it. We are shown it all the time by Indigenous teachers who want to rattle our cage and say, guys, you used to know how to do it. Let us remind you. And I would hope that a future that will inevitably be shorn of some of our worst traits, because our worst traits are basically unsustainable or we fry, might just free us to live around the fire, the metaphorical fire that might actually include a literal physical fire. So that's my note on ritual.
Thank you, Catherine. It's not often I hear the word soul and dickhead in the same sentence, so I'm grateful for that as well. Would anyone else like to share their answer? Janice, I love yours. Do you want to talk a little bit about love?
Yes, I mean, I think our universe was formed in love, and love is the way it connects, and that coinage won't exist by 71. Love will be the exchange thing that we use, because as Catherine was saying, we are all souls here, we're not just bodies. And I think that's the important thing, that there's they say there's a queue for people to come to planet Earth, because this is a wonderful schoolroom, a wonderful place for learning, and I think learning and growing is what we're here for.
Thank you, Janice. And I've just got one final question. This doesn't need to go in the chat, but what did you notice between the difference between asking a question around, prediction and anticipation versus your heart's desire? How was it for you to answer those questions? How different was it for you?
I think the heart's desire, actually, it surprised me a little, because I think it's the most abstract and simplest future vision I've had. I mean, I've done a few of these recently, and they tend to come up the same the same sort of image. It's very much a sort of local, everyone, strong community, very much economy is locally based and things. So it's a very visual, physical future. And then suddenly this one came, and it just feels that, I mean, what I put there was everyone lives a happy and fulfilled life. And the more I thought about it since, the more it seems it just perhaps encapsulates just about everything. I suppose it works on the premise that everyone, if they are themselves feel fulfilled and happy, that love and all these other qualities will flow from that. I might be wrong, but that, yeah. So I mean, I think that's the difference for me. It was much vaguer, and that's quite apart from the fact that, I'm still assuming I would be alive in 2071 anyway. But also thinking back, over the 50 years, the previous 50 years, what has changed since then, and how can you possibly project? I suppose the outward things, the materialistic aspects, the technological aspects, you could never predict 50 years ago what we have now. And yet we're probably having very similar conversations about the human condition. So maybe there isn't that much change.
There isn't. Thank you, Tony. That's it was a beautiful answer, and it obviously came from your heart. So, Loes, obviously today we've been talking about the logic and the sensory way of assessing. I don't know if you just wanted to share a little around that with the group, around how it's not just about having multiple futures, but it's also stepping into those futures in different ways.
Yes, it's sometimes I compare exploring multiple futures is almost like trying how to read in a sense. And I know I'm stressing a certain capability, but once you start using exploring a lot more futures and a lot more scenarios, you tend to things in the present. You sense more in the present, but things also make more sense in the present. So by stretching that imagination, we're sensing different things that were there all along, but somehow we just couldn't make sense of it. And I think what when we're prediction and planning always comes from a sense of linearity, right? So we're extrapolating our knowledge, experience from the past and the present, extrapolating that to the future. And we think there's a logic to it because this has happened before. This comes from experience, from data, from statistics, and that we are just thinking, okay, this is a line that's going that way. But if we what we are overlooking if we're doing that is that the cracks in that logic, in that linearity, and the fractures in the present, or what we call the trickster that is playing games with us, that things do not make sense yet, but somehow we can sense them. And we feel that by exploring multiple futures, I hope I'm not turning too vague all of a sudden, but by exploring multiple futures, you're opening yourself up for spontaneity and for emergence. And it's not about recognizing something that you were predicting before, but it's just being more alert. And sometimes we compare that with call it not doing. Not in a passive way of saying, oh, I'm just not going to do anything, but instead of constantly getting to an action mode of doing because it seems like a logical thing to do. It actually takes a lot of courage to slow down and to sense things in the present. And that obviously for some that has some similarity to mindfulness, and it is in a sense that you're realizing that future and past are both based on assumptions. They don't exist. They only exist in our imagination or in our memory. And at the same time, we're becoming just more an alert way. And that not doing is not a way of being passive, but the not doing, sometimes a lot of things change by not doing and not just doing. And we have lost a way of sensing in that way. And so, yeah, I don't know if that was and I think that's maybe to be comfortable with not knowing what's next can be incredibly empowering. And we're trying to eliminate that because it's scary, right? It's scary not to know what's coming next. And it's extremely useful and helpful to know what's next. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, but it's not enough. So we call it two legs. Like one leg, we're humping on preparation and planning, but you're not going to get very far because there's only so much you can take into account. You need the other leg for exploration and be open for emergence. And then you can walk on two legs. And once you start seeing all these different futures around you, once you can imagine, it's impossible to unsee them. It's like learning how to read. The moment you learn how to read, you cannot not read. It's incredibly empowering, gives you a lot of extra knowledge or the different possibilities. And and then it's just that is like with every capability, it's empowering, and at the same time it also takes practice. So what we're doing here is just showing you some letters. There's an alphabet and we can make words with it, and hopefully you'll some of the shift that I saw just in the people that responded, it's already freeing up. And it's incredibly empowering to think that there's not just one future that some company or narrative in the media or some government colonized for me. I can actually reclaim the power of imagination because it's meant to be for all. I hope I didn't scare anybody and it still makes sense. So,
Tony has a question.
Sorry. Sorry, just thinking, I mentioned this morning to my wife. It reminds me a little bit of the difference between Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. There's apparently,
you have to explain that.
Keith Richards wakes up in the morning and hasn't got a clue what's happening the whole day, and he just goes with it. Whereas Mick Jagger wakes up knowing exactly what he's doing the whole day. So, I mean, I had to laugh about that one, but there are people who need certainty, it seems to me. And I think, how do those people address this? There are people who, you know, I'm sort of a bit in between, but there are people, and possibly, you know, these are why maybe they hold on to more fundamentalist beliefs and things where there's certainty around it. How they can navigate the future is through some sort of rigid system.
Yeah, exactly. No, that's very true. There are definitely people who hold on to certain systems, and just because that gives them a sense of safety, right? So and there's no judgment there. That's totally fine. That's the one lag, and that gets you to a certain degree. And at the same time, now we also know that complexity is part of this amazing universe. So I think that people also understand that there's always an element of uncertainty. You might not always appreciate it, but there is it. So how can we practice or force practice the art of imagination to become a little bit more comfortable? And when we're doing these sessions, I always say it's not about making people, it's a little bit about making people uncomfortable and a little bit of confusion. That's totally fine. But it is, the process in itself is what you need, and it's also what you can handle, which is facilitating the process. It's always about the collective of the group. So if you feel uncomfortable exploring multiple futures, then that doesn't mean that you'll only go so far as you allow yourself to go, or what you can do within the group. So, and for people who I like certainty in certain places. It's not wrong. We make these assumptions, then we do this all the time. And we also try to deal with uncertainty all the time. This is just about making people aware of how we use futures. That's really it. So it's not about, if you're like certainty, that's not good. You should be very open. We are navigating, but we don't really understand how we do that. So this is about making people aware. Does that make a little bit sense? So no wrong or right. But maybe should we finish our little deep dive and then open the space for more questions? Is that okay? Okay. And just to, okay.
Yeah, it's over to Alex, I believe.
Yeah.
I'm unmuted. I am unmuted. Thanks, Steve. So the process that we're running through tonight is a taster. It's a whistle stop. The journeys that you've just been on, as some of you identified very quickly, was that there is the connection between the sensory inquiry and the cerebral cognitive inquiry. And in a full lab, there will be a lot of time to sort of unpack some of that, and in that process, in the cognitive inquiry of what you've sensed, what starts to rise to the top is perhaps some of the assumptions and preconceptions that are forming the view that you see when you visit certain futures. And having done that with a desirable and preferable future, it equips you and us to sort of interrogate those assumptions and find out how they hang, where even perhaps where they come from, and from that to find new perspectives and new questions. So the way that we do the next phase is we've got a reframe. So if you're looking at things from the thinking mode, what we can take you through is a scenario that challenges the ideas and visions that have come to you in the previous exercises. And another thing that we can do, and it's just as important, is to offer a reframe that perhaps works more in the sensory space. So connects more deeply with what you're feeling, maybe shakes some of what you are feeling, and offers new perspectives in the sensory space. And that's what we're going to do this evening. So if you hold on to the thoughts, visions, senses that you had from your journeys into 2071, you don't have to note them down, they don't have to sit heavy in your head, but just let them be in your body. We're going to do a listening exercise together. And at the end of that, there'll be a pause just for you to let things settle, and make notes if you want to of where you've been, what has changed, what has been further highlighted, or if nothing's changed, that's a worthy note as well. So if I could ask people to close their eyes for this process. Anyone who does happen, is a good example of poor planning from me. Anyone who does happen to have headphones immediately handy, it's good to put them in because you get a better experience from what you're going to listen to. Otherwise, we'll just have to trust the value of our speakers. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to sort your headphones out, sorry. Okie doke, thank you very much. So if you are happy having your eyes closed on screen, perfect. If you prefer to turn your camera off and be in your own space, great. The main thing is that you guys feel as comfortable as possible. And I will talk you through a short meditation, after which a fable will play, and we'll see you on the other side of it. So with eyes closed, we start with deep breaths in and long breaths out. If you can, have your feet or your hands or some part of your body touching the floor or the ground where you are. And keep taking those long, deep breaths. Hold for a little at the top. And those long out breaths. Now, as you breathe, focus on your heart. Feel it beating away with each breath. And as you focus on it, imagine a warm glow forming around it as an orb. And once that orb has formed, with each breath, allow the colors from that orb to travel round your body in whichever direction they like to take, but always returning to the heart at the end of the breath. Deep breaths in and long breaths out. With the orb of color around your heart, traveling all around your body and returning to its source. Now on the next breath, as that orb color travels around your body, let it leave through your hands or your feet and travel down through the floor, into the earth, down through the soil to the bedrock, and then to envelop rapidly the whole sphere of the earth itself before returning back to your heart. And now with each breath, try to settle that cycle of the warm glow in your heart, traveling around your body, out through your hands or your feet, down through the floor, through the soil to the bedrock, around the earth, and returning back up to your heart. And as that cycle begins to settle, find the lowest note that you can comfortably hum, and hum it until you hear the music begin.
There once was a boy who lived in the trees. He was friends with the plants and the beasts and the bees. He fed on the fruits and the nuts and the seeds, and he slept in a hammock of feathers and leaves. The boy's name was Enki. His age was unknown. He had simply appeared one day on his own, with a bucket of water and seeds to be sown, from which grew the nature he knew as his home. The nature provided for each of her guests. If they all played their part, they could all have the best. Because everyone shared in the work, play and rest, no creature went hungry, and none was a pest. The nature gave not only food to her friends, but supplied them with medicines to cure and to mend. She gave shelter and schooling, and all could depend on her powers to start, to sustain and to end. Enki and nature, they lived hand in hand, working hard to help all living things understand how from high in the mountains to deep in the sand, life interconnects through air, water and land. One morning, when Enki was climbing a tree, he spied in the distance the glimmering sea. He had long been invited to visit and be a guest of the waters and all who swim free. He could sense it was something he needed to do, so his friends helped him fashion a birch bark canoe. They threw a big party and shared all they knew of the passage downstream and the ocean so blue. Then, early next morning, while most were asleep, Enki picked up his paddle and left for the deep. Through misty moss woodlands and willows that weep, down the rapids and falls where the pink salmon leap. On his way to the ocean he covered much ground. Through meadows and valleys and canyons he wound, driven on by the ancient and beckoning sound of the waves rushing hard up the beaches they'd found. Enki stood for an age where the land and sea meet, while the breeze stroked his hair and the waves kissed his feet. He was wooed by the comforting, calming repeat of the ceaseless advance and its equal retreat. He grew keener to hear all the tales she could tell, and was drawn further out as the tide turned and fell. Taking one final look at the land he knew well, Enki drew a deep breath and dived into the swell. Enthralled by the shifting of colours and light, he swam underwater all day and all night, from the murky dark depths to the surface so bright, through glittering shoals flashing silver and white. Over time he made friends with all sea-dwelling creatures. They gladly became his advisors and teachers. He studied the ocean, her moods and her features, the troughs and the currents, the reefs and the beaches. Enki's time in the sea was an age that passed quickly, but during his visit the earth had grown sickly. The problems had started back up on the land and infected the rivers that flowed to the sand. Enki gradually noticed a change in the water, from healthy and pure to pollution and slaughter. Great swathes of the seabed were ploughed and left bare, and a sticky black poison appeared everywhere. He knew that this wasn't the way it should be. Equilibrium lost meant that greed was set free. His good friend the nature was being ignored, and she needed his help to get balance restored. By riding a sailfish back to the shore, Enki soon had his feet on the pebbles once more. But the view up the beach was not one that he knew, for the changes were many, and good ones were few. He was stunned by the mess and the pipes and the smoke, by the stains and the bleakness, the stench and the choke, but he had to keep moving as fast as he could to get back to his friends and his home in the wood. The journey back home was not easily done, for the valleys and meadows he'd known were now gone, and the streams he had followed to come to the sea were dried up and filled in. No water ran free. Instead, there were rivers of roaring machines, each belching and snarling through desolate scenes of waste and starvation, aggression and drought, all things being taken and none given out. Unable to track through the foul-smelling air, Enki waited till dark, when despite a strange glare he could just about spot enough stars in the sky to gather his bearings and plot a route by. He ran through the night till he finally came to a small group of trees which was all that remained of the sprawling lush forest that Enki had grown, and the peaceful contentment all life had once known. Most gently he trod on the old forest floor, concerned that his friends from the wood were no more. He made his way into the midst of the trees, to be met by a silence that clung to the leaves. So he sat himself down, with his palms to the ground, and connected his heart to the earth all around. He slowly developed a low humming note that vibrated the land till he started to float. Warm amber bubbles appeared in the dark. They emerged from the shadows, the roots and the bark. They gathered round Enki like moths to a flame, till he softly returned to the ground once again. And as soon as he opened his eyes to the scene, the bubbles all popped like the end of a dream. But from each fell a shower of glistening dust, which morphed into beings he knew he could trust. For each was a friend from the time before greed. They had died long ago, but their energy freed had lived on in the forest as new beasts and plants, witnessing gluttony's careless advance. The flies and the spiders, the ants and the moths, the squirrels, the lizards, the horses, the sloths, silver birch, redwood, primrose and fern, mushroom and algae, they all took their turn, recounting to Enki in prose, verse and song how the problems had started and where things went wrong. And they all named a beast who had turned up to stay in the spring after Enki had paddled away. To start with, the beast was in touch with the nature, gave more than it took, and was careful to cater for all generations as well as its own. To steal from the world was to steal from the home. It named itself People. The nature was pleased, for people seemed gentle and picked up with ease how to follow the cycles that seasons dictate, how to cherish the wonders that life can create. But gradually people thought they should have more. They forgot what the balance of nature was for. They expanded, pretending they owned everything, and invented the haves, the have-nots, and a king. They valued possessions as greater than life, and judged on each other till hatred was rife. They dug and they buried, they slashed and they burnt, and never the lessons of history were learned. Eventually, even the sky had been broken, yet still not a word of true balance was spoken. Transfixed by illusions of growth, they fell deaf to the fact that the only thing growing was death. The nature gave warnings that people were wrong, that cycles were broken and forces too strong, but the storms and the droughts drove the people to war. For ignoring her guidance, they still wanted more. Enki knew that no life form was ever created, whose purpose was wanton destruction and hatred, and having heard every account, he was clear that the people were being misguided by fear. They'd invented a question that caused them much strife, as they stubbornly pondered the meaning of life. They knew it was more than the sum of its parts, but inquired with their minds and neglected their hearts. So over the ages discovery bloomed, hypothesis, logic, and arrogance boomed, and with every incredible fact they found out, the more their hearts filled with the terror of doubt. It appeared that the drone of their fear was made less by reciting a list of the things they possessed. To people, possessions were proof they were living, which drove their addiction to taking, not giving. With the cause of the avarice brought into view, Enki asked if his friends ever saw people who seemed to question the reasons for waste and destruction, who sensed they should follow more peaceful instruction. Yes, came a chorus, the children, the young, for they look to their hearts like a flower to the sun. They can easily sense where the balance should lie and inquire of their elders to understand why are the seas being poisoned? Is she looking sad? Why is some killing good and not all killing bad? Why don't those people have as much food as we do? Is it wrong to ignore what we feel to be true? Yes, the young of the people are naturally prone to interrogate feelings which clash with their own. They're connected directly to love and to joy, for compassion is born in each girl and each boy. But it seems as the children grow tall and grow strong, so the elders convince them their hunches are wrong. The youngsters are taught to feel worthless and needy and lured to mature in the ways of the greedy. Well, Enki was pleased with this news from his friends, for it proved to him how the imbalance would end. He explained that as sure as the rise of the tide, he was certain that elders are children inside. Enki swore if his friends told all youngsters the truth, the knowledge they shared would empower the youth to trust in their hunches, to question excess, to stand up for values they're taught to repress, to reject the insistence of rampant consumption, and call on the elders to back the resumption of seeking to give and not chasing to take, re-embracing the balance for everyone's sake. And so, as the morning cracked orange and grew, Enki and friends disappeared through the dew, to travel the world planting peaceful ideas by whispering truth into young people's ears. Before long, in fact after just one generation, the footprint of greed was a global sensation. Some elders could see that too much had been taken. The child inside them was beginning to waken. In 6 generations, a shift was in sight. Both youngsters and elders sensed balance was right, and worked with the nature to find the delight of living in peace with no cravings to fight. By the 12th generation, the change was complete, for the glory of nature was back on its feet, and the people were living in sync with the beat of the rhythms that pulse from the earliest heat of a loop that burst out from the tissue of time, where dimensions and quanta in balance define a system of infinite growth and decline, in which life is all things, and all things are sublime.
Okay. Thank you very much for your ears. When you feel ready, if you have something to share about how that landed with where you'd been before, with how your visions of futures landed in that story, what deepened, what drifted away, what was new, what was old. However it landed, if you're happy to share that, that would be great.
I'll go.
Lovely, thanks, Bob.
Yeah, break the ice. Wow, how long have you got? It takes you on a journey through all of those experiences and memories that we have of thinking differently, and for me especially, seeing the world through my eyes. And it's taken me a long time to believe that the way I see the world is not necessarily wrong. Having been told all my life that my visions were not other people's visions, I suppose, but people, it comes back to listening, it comes back to education, it comes back to methodologies, it comes back to openness, it comes back to indoctrination, it comes back to seeing life through the eyes of children, as Picasso and Kendone both said. They spent their lives trying to draw like children. We don't have 12 generations. We don't have time. We don't have the benefit of, well, we have the benefit of hindsight because we can always look back, and it's easy in a funny kind of way to join the dots up, and we can see how serendipity has played a massive part in where we've on our journey to where we've ended up now. The trick is to try and see how we place those dots in the future. And then how can we join up those future dots, which is the analogy of going forward 50 years, I try and use 6 months, trying to look forward 6 months and imagine if I was in this situation in 6 months' time, will it necessarily, and the answer is no, it's going to be so not important. So you then look at the now through the eyes of the future and take with you, if you were going on a journey around the world and you were going to go and traveling, you're going to pack a backpack and you're going to put in your backpack the things that you really want to take with you that are useful, and you're going to leave behind everything else. So it's a journey of letting go. It's a journey of taking out of the reality of today. What have I learned from today? What can I take with me into tomorrow? What can I let go? And it's a constantly ever changing perspective. My life changes. Somebody said to me, "Are you having a good day?" And I said, "You need to rephrase that. Am I having a good hour?" And then it's, am I going to have, and then I'm going to have a bad hour, and then I'm going to have a good hour, and then I'm going to have a fantastic hour. And looking back over the day, and then you can actually say, okay, am I satisfied with my day? Not necessarily happy, but did I, in my case, I try and leave the world or people in a better place from which I inherited it in the morning. Sorry if I'm rambling on, but you did ask the question. I shall stop there.
No rambling. No, it's beautiful.
Oh.
Thank you very much, Bob. It's really, it's exactly the point, is to experience your journey. So thank you.
Can I, Bob, can I respond to you briefly?
Yeah, sure.
Because what you're touching upon is such a fundamental issue of this kind of thinking, is that the moment we start planning for the future, for a certain result in the future, it's almost like we're postponing our own responsibility. Yeah. And the founder of this future literacy says that if we really want to demonstrate that we care for future generations, we have to live by our values in the present. Yeah. It's we call it compost thinking. It's like your whatever you're deciding, your thinking, your attitude, you're leaving compost. We're all becoming compost. They're saying that we don't like things to discontinue, right? We like immortality. But we're all becoming compost, and it's the quality of the compost that is the legacy. So how do you make sure? And I think carpe hora, I think Chris put it out there. It's probably a good way to leave some good compost. Thank you, Bob, for sharing.
There's some some beautiful stuff written here. Penny, thank you so much for sharing that. That is a beautiful thing to have said, and a very open and honest thing to have shared. I really respect that you put that up. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure I can speak.
Shall I read it out loud for those who haven't seen it?
Actually, no, I will. Come on, let's be brave.
Thanks, Penny.
I'm feeling a bit shy, but yes, I mean, I have thought a lot about death and dying, because I'm in the vulnerable category with COVID. And so next to my computer is my will and all of my bank details. And so my partner and daughter know what to do if I die. And I've actually gone through, I mean, Steve, I know Steve well, and I've gone through that whole cycle of I'm fine now. And hope and imagination drive my daily reason to get up in the morning. And it's fantastic in a way, creativity in a crisis.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I don't think we have any other option than creativity in a crisis, but that's opinion. I shouldn't be sharing that. Sylvia, while listening, I was struck by the necessity of providing children with new stories, and moreover with confidence, so that they can create their stories. Thank you, Sylvia. That really links into, I'm talking about myself now and I shouldn't, but how I ended up or started working with Loes. Is exactly that feeling of not just children per se, but the child inside all of us. The soul, the us before we decided to take the form that was expected of us. And to open narratives. So when we talk in futures literacy, very often about how the subconscious assumptions and predictions that we draw from the past, and that we are soaked in the ever-present media, or by the ever-present media and the life we live, it colonizes our futures. So when we project, we look forward into what might happen, whether it be desirable or probable. Those futures are littered with, entirely formed with predictions, assumptions. Mm-hmm. And when we draw those from only dystopian narratives, or from a very small collection of more open narratives, we're restricted in our capacity to visit the future, and therefore in our capacity to act in the present. I don't know if Sylvia wants to say anything on that. I've talked on your point there, sorry.
No, I think you're right. Decolonizing futures, that's a very thought-provoking term. And Alex is right, is that who creates, who has the power to create these future stories? What are we seeing? There's so many, because we're suffering from the poverty of imagination, it's really difficult to imagine from ourselves. So we get fed with all these images, but whose futures are they? If we're talking about this is for the future, whose future? Did we ask anybody? Did we ask children? Are they at the seat at the table? Are they involved in these conversations? So this is also about understanding like Alex was saying, underlying assumptions. So we can really open up for emergence. And the more we plan and prepare for the future, we are depriving future generations of their chance to be open for emergence and for spontaneity and to be fully, really creative and imaginative. So we always try and say, we're decolonizing futures. We just want to start different open narratives, explore different futures, because again, these are meant to be for all and they cannot be colonized by a small group of people. So this is really about, I know it's called futures literacy, it's plural. It's hard to pronounce in Dutch. So a lot of Dutch people say future literacy. And then if you say it too quickly, you forget the plural, you can forget the S and it sounds like there's one. That's why you need to slow down and pronounce it correctly. Then you know there's multiple. But it is about stretching the imagination basically and seeing things differently in the present, really opening up and enhance our perception, embrace complexity, and ultimately discover a new sense of agency that maybe has more with appreciating the present, not doing, being alert, observant, together with planning and preparation. I mean, we all need to plan our day, but it's that's a little bit what it is. And yeah, we're just wondering what maybe some new insights or new questions come up, because we usually follow a similar process, which is exploring, gathering, unpacking probable, desirable futures, and then taking our participants through an experience, whether it's a story or images or something different, a different vision, and not something that they planned or prepared for, just a different story. And then, we get to unpack assumptions that we had in the first place. And that can lead to new questions, new insights. So yeah, this was our little experiment. I hope it made you a little bit curious. And I think we have some time for questions. Because yes, I've been doing this for several years and it's my life. I love it. But it's, maybe it's interesting, Steve, because you're just joined. You're in the middle of a journey this week. So maybe if there's anybody who'd like to ask a question to Steve or Alex or me about futures literacy or the journey that we're on, then I'd like to open the floor.
Yeah, hi guys. Just one quick question. I'm sure you're all aware of the NASA test on children that they did, where 98% at the age of 2 or 3% with genius level, and by the time they get to the age of 15, it's 2%. Is this a process of de-education, a process of futures literacy, trying to re-educate ourselves and to let go of all the conditioning and education that we've had to date? But equally, how can we put in place a system? I don't want a system, I hate that word, a balance that the children that we follow, that are following us, are not conditioned into the same way of thinking that we've ended up where we are. And one of the things that really struck me, and I've held this memory in my head for a long time, is when my kids went to a local school, primary school called West Dean. I walked through the door at the age that they were 3-4 years old, and it was an absolute fantastic, it was a box of imagination. There were pictures on the wall, there were plays, there was music, whichever way you turned, the children's creativity was celebrated. It was all over the place. And when my son was 11 and he went to the local high school, my heart absolutely sank like a stone driving down that drive to the school, which was a grey, featureless building with a barren landscape, very few trees, no landscape, and everything about the school. There was maybe one or two, the odd motivational poster on the wall, like they were playing lip service to something. How can we change that? How can you guys, I don't know, how do we do that?
I hear you, Bob. I would say planning this, I think I'm always very hesitant to advocate a certain future that I think is better, because I don't know. I don't know what is better, but I think what you're talking about is we use this capability to question the status quo, or to question certain behavior, to question patterns and systems, and in education, and I'm an educator, but I remember when I was a little girl, it was just before I went to kindergarten or to primary school, and I was crying, and my mom said, "Why are you crying? I thought you were this curious kid." And and I said, "I don't want to go because I can't read or write yet." And then she said, "But that's where you're going to go to learn." And somehow when I was little, I associated school with a place where I had to perform and not to show that I could already do it, and not a place where you can learn. And I think that a lot of these systems they have this trajectory towards a certain kind of destination, like some productivity, something that you need to show for, that you need to produce, that you need to, I don't know, celebrate, be assessed on, and ticking all these boxes. And I think somewhere down the line, we got lost on what is really important. It's the journey, the learning. And we forgot to ask the question that there's learning everywhere around us. And so if there's potential to learn everywhere in life, then what is happening in the classroom? And we are asking people, we're guiding the processes to ask these fundamental questions. Now, does that mean that it's going to change, that's going to be better? That I don't know, but it's not going to be because of a lack of imagination.
Sorry, I was struggling to unmute. Again, yes, I think that the temptation to fall into a conversation of the hows, what futures, and how do we get there, it's really tempting. And that's where, in my experience, and Liz, jump in if I've got it wrong, but in my experience of FL, when you are able to experience the whole lab process, is that after you reach the sort of place that we've come to today, we go back in to a more systematic process, but a way of drawing this into, right, what next? What are my new questions? And from those questions, what are my new actions for now? And that, for me, provides the connect between what can, for many of us, be an almost unmanageable weight or burden of considering what futures might be, and bring it back to a transferring it to an immediate function in the now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. Are there any more questions from anybody or comments?
Loes, I asked that, and I had a response saying so many.
Yes. Oh, Penny. Yes. Can you pick one for now?
Eva's wrote to me and she said that she has a quick one if we have time, and I would say yes to that. So, Eve.
Hi everyone. Am I off mute?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Hi guys. Thank you. I know I speak for all of us. Just been really, very, very stimulating evening. So I'm the head of a school with pupils from 11 to 18, and it occurred to me that now that we're in 2021, not a single child in school of any age now, anywhere, has lived in the 20th century. They're actually all kids of the 21st century. I don't know what happened to the 2010s. It's like I lost a decade somewhere. But we're kind of already into the third decade of the 20th century, of 21st century now. So all of these, you know, I'm of an age where I still thought the planes would drop out of the sky in 1999 when we turned the millennium, you know, the Y2K bug, if that ages me. But you know, I thought such a lot about Bob's question actually, which is, you know, what if we were rebuilding everything from a brownfield or greenfield site in some nirvana context or post-apocalyptic world, you know, what would be the knowledge? What would we actually want to pass to our children as wisdom and knowledge? And perhaps those two things are not entirely identical, but there's some overlap. And I was very struck by some research from, I think, Stanford University's kind of entrepreneurial courses and things, where they were working with executives from Air New Zealand and various corporates to try and almost do this unlearning, you know, get out of this corporate mechanistic groupthink and try to get back to that freedom of childhood where you actually, you don't self-inhibit and you don't self-edit your creative mind, your creative output. And they found it very, very difficult to get people as adults to actually be confident enough to start that process. But once they could get them going, it was like these people went mad, you know. And it's like, I take great hope from this, that it's actually all there. And so it's just, we've made it dormant. We have buried it so deep and we've overlaid it with a lot of conditioning and habits. And, you know, there's no place for this really. And I've got my responsibilities with my mortgage, etc., that we kind of keep it underground quite a lot of the time, lest it be released like the genie from the bottle and never goes back in, you know, sort of refuses to go back in. But one thing they did find worked was, they said, you know, as a thought experiment, to say, imagine that there is no idea that is off limits, nothing is wrong, nothing is bad, you know, there's no, your boss will think bad of you if you say something ridiculous. This is the session where anybody can say anything. And this released then all of this, you know, fantastic creative thought processes about everything from how big the airline seats were on Air New Zealand to passenger check-ins. I mean, it's like all about their company, but it was just this phenomenal release of people's creativity and creative thought. So thinking about in a school environment, sort of up to 18, whatever, 18-ish, 19, you know, it's always this balance between knowledge that you need in order to then be very creative with it, and just pure creativity without the knowledge to then have agency to do things, make things, fix things, and, you know, have sort of traction in the modern world. So I sense these two arguments are always going to be a little bit in tension about the balance in schools for those things. But perhaps if COVID has taught us something, that school is not the only place that people learn. And, you know, whatever schools have to do or not do in this country, that country, the curriculum, the not curriculum, this political regime, that political regime, what people think, actually kids are learning all the time, 24/7. They learn from you, they learn from me, they learn from the people in their lives. And I wonder whether we've slightly undervalued this before. I mean, all this lockdown, everyone had to homeschool their kids. So they're as all of you know, your people's children then saw, if mum and dad were working from home, let's say, they saw their parents working. They had to see them in a different mode rather than just on holiday or at home after work, where previously it was take your kid to work day was the only way that you would actually see. Often you would see your parents in a different mode. So my sense from what I'm seeing already amongst young people is that there's an opportunity for a really strong shared partnership from the grown-ups between the formal educators who are wearing a badge saying, I'm a teacher, I'm a lecturer, I'm an educator, and all the adults in their lives who have an impact on them, whom they admire, they love, they trust, they feel safe, they feel inspired by you. And that's your neighbours, it's everybody, it's all of us. And we have to maybe just recognise that how we are and how we present to them, and how much joy we have or don't have, how much laughter we have or don't have, affects their levels of optimism and hope. And I love this idea of, you know, what is the new narrative we can give our children? What are those stories that our children need with the child in all of us? I think this will re-emerge. I do think it's there latent, but it almost needs enough joy, you know, it needs enough encouragement and faith to come out. And when there's so much doom and gloom and nihilism and negativity around us, which we know through our intellectual faculties, there's very good reasons for all of that. It's very hard to shift that away enough to release all that other stuff from which kids really get nourished. You know, you just watch the difference in a small child when their parent laughs. You know, their shoulders go down, they think, oh my God, you know, mum or dad's laugh. It's very, very primal, actually. And maybe, have we overcomplicated things? Ultimately, that's my question. Do you think we've started overthinking it all, and it's time to strip it back a bit and just get back to basics? Long question, sorry. More of a self-indulgent reflection, I apologise.
Shall I go? I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Do a TED talk, Eve. Please do a TED talk. Come and talk at Bath Uni, please. You're booked.
I'm booked. Very cheap rates. All I need is a chocolate brownie, I promise you.
I make good brownies.
What struck me, one of the many things that struck me in what you were saying there was in terms of connection and have things become overcomplicated, and how do we reconnect? And a phrase I use is attempting to create new stories of old truths. I don't think we need to come up with anything new. It's all there, as you say. Things have just become hidden, and sorry if I'm crowbarring it back to futures literacy, but yeah, that's exactly it. That so much of that stuff is hidden under a pile of received assumptions. One of those is our relationship with uncertainty. You don't have to dig too far into one's relationship with uncertainty to discover that actually the things you hold most strongly, love, gratitude, grief, those feelings live in uncertainty. They are unprovable. You have faith in them. So actually, uncertainty is our most comfortable place. We just need to find a new compass for it, and FL, in my experience, has provided that.
Yeah.
I was just going to touch on a gift we were given today. Apparently, Aboriginals believe there are 99 senses. So whilst most of our conversation's been about futures today, I suspect there's a lot in our past that we've left behind that would be useful to take with us too.
Mm. Yeah.
And on the note of gifts, I've popped a little note in the chat that gives everyone a £10 off voucher to book the 3-part course coming in June to really look into futures literacy more together over a much longer period of time. So please do indulge yourself in that, which ends at the end of Friday. So just on the topic of gifts, that's one from Hawkwood to you. And thank you so much, Loes, Alex and Steve. We absolutely love the work that you do here with futures literacy, and we can't wait to have it more embedded into Hawkwood. This is me also stealing some of Alicia's words. She's with us today, but her internet isn't strong enough to thank with in person, so she's popped a note in the chat. But thank you so much, and thank you everyone for the amazing insights that have came through from this inquiry. But please do feel free to bring your closing words, Loes, Alex and Steve, and thank you all for coming and for your presence.
it's always, I think, although I'm in the Netherlands, I feel like I'm a regular at Hawkwood, an online regular, because this is not the first time I've been in this space, and I'm always incredibly struck by the openness of the people, and the courage to speak, and the vulnerability, and so this was no exception. And I'm incredibly proud to work with Alex, but it's great to have Steve here too, and to work with these two extremely talented young men. And I feel there's a lot of synergy. So I just, if you want more of this and you want to understand it a little better and to see how you can, how this works for you, or just, then please join us in June. Then we're doing 3 weeks, 3 sessions. A lot more in depth than this little tasting, and hope to see you there. So thank you so much for being with us. It was really great.